Hello, everyone. My name is Troy. I am the average conservative. Welcome to my YouTube channel. This is the first video in my channel, and I am creating this because our nation is so divided. And I believe it is divided so much because people really do not understand what others are all about, the people that they do not agree with or see eye to eye with. And I wanted to help others be knowledgeable as far as what conservatives believe in, what we are all about, why we believe in what we believe in, and what does it mean to be a conservative. And to start out, I want to explain what it does mean to be a conservative. Conservative comes from the word conserve, which we want to conserve the ideology, the values, the principles that America was founded on. Most people have heard the term Christian nation applied to America. And some people say, oh, America is not a Christian nation. But it's not saying that America is a nation of Christians or that you have to be a Christian. The term comes from the concept that the nation was founded on Judeo-Christian principles and values. Christianity has the core value of freedom, that God gives mankind free will because he is not forcing us to love him. So we are able to choose if we want to love him, if we want to follow him, if we want to reject him. And that, of course, comes with the consequence of, what happens if we make our choices to reject him and stuff like that. And so we have that freedom in this nation. That idea comes from Christianity. And there are other, of course, values such as small government. The Old Testament in the Bible speaks about God's people wanting a king because they didn't have a king. And so, God was trying to warn them not to have one, but every other nation around them had a king, so they wanted a king, and they kept asking over and over. God finally gave them a king, and eventually it didn't turn out so well because a king is a man and mankind is flawed. A man that has that much power will eventually abuse that power. And so our founding fathers wanted limited government. They came from a country that did have a king that abused his power and was forcing a lot of things on all the people. So they wanted, limited government so they were able to have a lot of freedoms like religious freedom. And that means that not everyone has to be a Christian, not everyone has to believe in God. We can have Muslims, we can have Buddhists. That is in the First Amendment. Now the First Amendment basically just says that the government shall not infringe on your religious rights. It does not say anything about people not allowing to vote or have any kind of religious ideology in government. Nowhere does it say any kind of separation of church and state. But if you do your research on that, that is basically comes from a church that was contacting someone worried about that the government was going to force certain ideology on them, and they said no, there is a separation of church and state in that regard. That they're not going to force people to follow a certain ideology or religious belief. But moving on, there's other values like the nuclear family. That was something that the founding fathers believed in, but that doesn't mean that you are forced to have a nuclear family. We are a free nation. You're free to have another family that's not considered a nuclear family. Some people do say Christianity is bad because it allows slavery, and I want to debunk that right now because nowhere in the Bible, nowhere does Christianity ever say slavery is good or supported in any way. What it does is that the Bible acknowledges mankind is flawed, that we have an evil nature, and that we will hurt others. So, if you can imagine, if you take slavery in America as an example, if God was to supposedly speak to the slaves and say, oh, well, you shouldn't put up with that. Don't accept the way they treat you and fight back. What would have happened? They didn't have the resources, they didn't have the weapons, they didn't have the numbers to win their freedom. And realistically speaking, the slaves in America did not win their freedom because they revolted. They got their freedom because there were other people who believed in Christian values, that we are all equal under the eyes of God and slavery was bad, that they voted against slavery and did it that way. It was very difficult because, of course, the South, anywhere where agriculture was the main part of the economy, they used slave because it was free labor. They didn't have to pay anyone. That greed, that love of money, that is the root of all evil, they say. That love of money convinced them to justify slavery. So it was an ongoing battle. Ultimately, the true Christian ideology won, and slavery has been abolished. And so those who think slavery was supported by Christianity, no, it's not supported. It's just acknowledged. God acknowledges man's going to be this way. And instead of telling the slaves, hey, fight for your freedom, it tells them, you know what? Change their hearts. There is a part of the Bible where, the Roman soldiers used to be able to stop people and say, hey, you have to carry my armor and equipment for 1 mile. That was the law. So it tells them, you know what? Don't carry it 1 mile. Carry it 2 miles. So if you can imagine the reaction a Roman soldier would have had if they go up and tell someone, hey, you have to carry my stuff for 1 mile. And this person says, you know what? I'm going to carry it 2 miles for you. It's out of love. They will be very surprised. We're like, wow, what is it that drives these people? It's eventually going to win them over. And that's what it's all about. It's winning the hearts of others. That's why the Bible tells Christians to love your enemies. It never says to hate them, never says to, wish that they're dead or anything like that, or pray for their death. No, it's love your enemies. And that's the way, as Christians, we are supposed to be. So that ideology, was put in the founding of this nation. So conservatives want this nation to kind of hold on to those traditional ideals. Now, liberals, on the other hand, that's, the whole meaning of the word liberal is to kind of be away from traditional values. And that's fine. I'm not saying it's a bad thing. I'm not saying that it's something that people should never do. That's all up to you. I'm not trying to influence anyone. I'm not trying to convince anyone to change their mind, change their heart. All I want is for people to understand what they're talking about. So when they speak with conservatives, they don't say, oh, well, you're a racist, homophobe, bigot, all this kind of stuff. No, that's not what we're about. The Bible teaches that homosexuality is a sin. But hello, gluttony is a sin. Lying is a sin. There's a lot of overweight people out there. There's a lot of people that lie, pretty much everyone. There's all these sins, and Christians are no different. We're no better than anyone else. Yes, you're looking at a hypocrite. I am a hypocrite, and so is the rest of the world. Because everyone is going to tell you, if you ask them, is it a good thing to lie? they're going to say no for the most part. You may get some like, well, I mean, if it's a white lie to spare someone pain and you don't want to hurt their feelings or something like that. But if you just say no and just, lying to your boss as far as, your performance or anything like that, they're going to say, no, that's dishonest. Lying is not a good thing. They'll say that, but do they lie themselves? Yes, they do. So we're all hypocrites, you know. And that is the whole concept of Christianity, is that we're sinners, we're broken, and we need a savior. And that's it. True Christianity does not condemn other people for their choices. We are supposed to love others, you know. And so I do not like when people mislabel and say, oh, well, conservative Christians are, they're bigots and they're homophobes. I mean, I don't know why they even use that term. I'm not scared of anyone who's, homosexual. I have plenty of people in my life that are of that lifestyle, and I love them. They're freaking awesome people, and they're great to hang out with. And so, I don't want people to have this misunderstanding of what we're all about as conservatives. And I will go ahead and end it here. Thank you for staying with me for so long, but I will continue some of these videos. We'll talk about some other terminology, and hopefully I will get some that don't know to understand not only what conservatism is about, but what other terminology means when they say things like fascist. But thank you for sticking around, and make sure you just keep that open dialogue, keep talking, and I will see you soon. Thank you.